Welcome to Woman on Her Path. Every woman has her own unique path. But what does that mean? How does said woman know what her path is? How does she find the courage to follow her path? I am your host, Tiffany Cooper. I am a mother, energy worker, community herbalist, and bhakti yogi. By sharing my experiences and insights on my path, I hope to inspire and encourage you on yours. When we follow our path, we find the answers we need in life. Let's find answers together and create a better world for ourselves and those around us. Hello, gorgeous woman, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Woman on Her Path. The 59th episode, to be exact. It has been just over a year since I started recording this podcast, and I can't believe it. And I will have a belated anniversary episode coming up soon. It has been my pleasure to talk to you about so many pertinent and critical topics in every woman's life. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve women in such a meaningful way. Today's episode is a phenomenal example of how important it is for women to serve other women so that we all progress. Today's guest is a glowing example of how, with the right support and determination, a woman can turn her life around and create a healthy space, not just for herself, but for others as well. Before I get to the interview, though, I'd just like to take a moment to address some listener questions. In the past, I have left questions for the end of the episode, but I really want listeners to hold the information given in the interview close to your hearts and minds without pondering anything else. So here it goes. I have received a few questions about subscribing to the podcast because that opportunity is available in various places now. So the best way to subscribe is through Patreon. You can download the app and or listen through the website. I say this is the best way because by joining through the Patreon page, you can become part of the Woman on Her Path community and enjoy other benefits like monthly group energy readings and group discussions about the topics mentioned in the podcast. Also, through Patreon, from time to time, I will offer classes on meditation, yoga, herbalism, tarot readings, and other fun and interesting things. However, if you listen to the podcast on other platforms and decide to subscribe there, for just $5 a month, you will get access to the weekly episodes of Woman on Her Path. Without a subscription, you only receive the monthly episode of the podcast. So I hope that clears things up for all listeners. However you get the podcast, I am grateful to you for listening, and I can't wait to share even more empowering content with you. So now my interview today is with a marvelous guest. Her name is Sheri Kurdakul. Please note that this interview speaks to a significant issue that affects a large proportion of women on this planet: domestic abuse. Now, if this is a sensitive topic for you, please take care and listen when you feel prepared. Whether you have dealt with domestic abuse or not, it is imperative that you hear what Sheri has to say. Much of what she shares can help any woman possibly avoid and definitely remove themselves from an abusive relationship. If you or someone you know does need help, in addition to the resources Sheri speaks about on this episode of the podcast, please contact one of the myriad of local or national abuse hotlines and organizations available to us all. Also note that there are organizations that address every aspect of abuse, so you are not alone. Please refer to the show notes of this episode for a bit more information. Please get help. As a survivor of emotional and mental abuse myself, I can tell you that healing is always the answer. You do not have to suffer. Now for the interview. Hello, beautiful woman. Thank you for listening to Woman on Her Path. I hope you're having a lovely day, taking care of yourself and focusing on the things that have true meaning to you. And speaking of such things, I'm so excited to welcome a very special guest on the podcast today, Sheri Kurdakul. Sheri is someone who I have been wanting to sit down with for a very, very long time. I met Sheri at an herbalism conference, and the moment I laid eyes on her, I knew she was special. She literally glows. I have been wanting to have her on the podcast for quite some time to talk about a subject that is very important to me. Sheri has lots of experience and knowledge in regard to a particular topic that affects far too many women around the world: domestic or intimate partner abuse. If you are a subscriber of the show, you have heard me mention statistics on abuse of women and girls. In fact, just last week, I reminded you that the vast majority of abuse cases of women and girls are perpetrated by someone we know. It is so important for us all as women to get as much knowledge and support as we possibly can when we are in these situations or know someone else who is. Also, before we get started, let me just say that if the subject of abuse is triggering to you, please listen with care and be sure that you are in a frame of mind that will allow you to stay in balance upon hearing this topic discussed. Basically, please take care of yourself. So without further ado, let's welcome Sheri. Sheri, welcome to the show. I'm so grateful that you are willing to be on Woman on Her Path and share your expertise and the tools you have with listeners of the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I really appreciate you sharing your space.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. So please just tell us a bit about yourself and your background and what you do to serve other women.
So I have kind of a Renaissance resume, if you will. I've worked in a ton of different industries, all kind of along the lines of marketing, and marketing is my background. But I carried all that along with also being a survivor of 29 years of domestic violence, child sexual assault, child abuse, adult sexual assault. And I also say that I'm a survivor of criminal court, civil court, and multiple family courts because the courts are abusive situations as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Where did that all lead you to? What are you doing now as a result of those experiences?
Well, back in 2016, when my youngest daughter was 10, she built an anti-bullying mobile app for her science fair project. And that was really the catalyst that got me thinking about how are people documenting what's happening to them. When I was documenting, and I documented everything because anyone in a position of authority tells you to do so, I did by writing in journals, or we didn't have cell phones back in my day, aging myself a little here. But I had just volumes and volumes of books. But those journals were dangerous because if they were discovered, they could spawn new abuse. So I had to be very careful about what I documented and how I documented. So through this tool that my daughter had built gave me the idea of building an online documentation tool. But then I went to lunch with a friend of mine who is an attorney, and she said to me, "Have you ever heard of the Daubert standard?" And I was like, "Ooh, what's the Daubert standard?" So she explained to me that it was the gold standard of what expert testimony and evidence has to meet in order to be considered admissible evidence in a court of law. That was really a turning point for me, looking at, well, there's lots of things that you could use already with cell phones and everything of documenting what's happening. But how do we make it so that it's actually legally admissible as evidence? And so that put me on the quest to build the tool, which is now known as Victim's Voice. So Victim's Voice is a legally admissible documentation tool that helps individuals document abusive behaviors as they're happening. Now, I say as they're happening with a caveat that when it's safe for them to document, obviously they're not going to have the opportunity to say, "Wait, can you stop for a moment while I document this?" But as soon as it's safe for them to do so, we take them through a series of questions that helps them document the right information. When you're documenting in a journal, you might not know what to document, what's legal, what's illegal behavior. When someone calls you a name or makes you feel bad about yourself, that's not illegal. But in context of the overall abusive situation, it can show a pattern of grooming and escalation that eventually leads to that behavior that is not legal.
Wow, what a powerful tool.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really amazing to give women a way to document things that is safe. As you said, if they're writing things in journals, or because I know I've had some training as well with intimate partner abuse. And that's always the trick. Women are afraid to write things down or even reach out to someone because they're afraid of the repercussions of that. But here you've given them a way to actually discreetly, record things. And then what happens? So they document it on the app, and then it's stored on the app then, obviously, or how does that all work?
So we call it an app, but it's not really an app. It's what's known as a progressive web app. So there's nothing to download to any device. So if you can't afford a smart device, you can go to a public library, or you can go to your school, or wherever you have access to an online tool. You could use a friend's phone. That's fine. You would log into your account, and then you would be able to start documenting. The information is a one-way door. So we've built in not only protections from other people accessing it, but we've built in protections from the victim themselves. And I say that because there's a term that's used a lot called love bombing. And that's when an explosive, abusive behavior happens, an incident occurs, and then the victim may try to walk away from the relationship, and the abuser will come back and shower them with gifts and affection and all these things to pull them back in again. And it's like that one step forward, two steps back, because every time they come back, it's great for just a moment, but then it escalates even further the next time. But during that love bombing phase, when everything seems really fantastic, oftentimes the victim will do everything they can to erase all of the evidence because they don't want to rock the boat. We have our system set up so the victim can't even access the information that they put in, not the raw data. They can generate a report, but the raw data goes in and cannot be deleted, cannot be altered, cannot be viewed in its native state. We do this also, in addition to the love bombing sort of scenario. More importantly, we do this because we have to prove to the court's chain of custody of that evidence. So we have to be able to certify that the information that goes in has not been tampered with, altered, or destroyed at all. And we can't do that if you can access the data in any way, shape, or form.
Wow. That's what you've worked out the whole system. That's really amazing.
Yeah. We have another protection also, and our biggest complaint that we get from users is, well, you don't allow me to upload audio or video. I've recorded the situation and I can't upload it into the app. And that is true. So, Tiffany, you reside in Pennsylvania. I reside in New Jersey. In New Jersey, we are what's considered a one-party consent state, meaning that if I am part of a conversation, I can legally record it without letting the other person know. Pennsylvania is an all-party consent state, and it has a caveat that without expressed consent, meaning that you have to have either written or verbal documented consent, then it is a felony to record someone else without their consent. And I don't know any abusers that are going to allow someone to stop the abuse. May I record you abusing me? And then going forward from there. So we do not allow for audio or video. We do allow for images, and we encourage as many images, and we don't limit the amount of images that they upload into their account. Pictures tell 1,000 words.
Okay, so what's the next step? So a woman uploads all of this information. It's held by victim's voice.
Correct.
And then when she is ready to do something, whether it's call the police or take this man to court, her abuser to court, what's the next step? How do they access what they've basically uploaded onto the site?
So while we as a technology company are not bound by as many federal regulations as, say, a crisis shelter is, we still work with a lot of those organizations and government agencies. So we held ourselves to the high standards that they must meet. So one of those standards is called a FIPSA rule. And the FIPSA rule says that any organization that receives VOCA funds, and those are federal funds, must, anytime they release any information having to do with a survivor, victim, survivor, whatever category you want to be put into, there are rules to releasing that information. And that information must be released with the survivor's consent, expressed consent. It must be to a specific individual, and it must be within a reasonable amount of time for a specific purpose. So that's a very narrow swim lane that you must navigate. So what we do is the user goes into their account and designates what we call a records recipient. So the user is giving consent by assigning an individual, and that individual has 7 days to claim that report and those files. After those 7 days, that claim is revoked. And in addition to that, once they've claimed those records, that grays out. They no longer can do it again.
Okay.
So we meet all that criteria. And if a user designates a records recipient and then they change their mind, they can revoke that access at any time. And that records recipient would not be able to get those files.
Such a safe space that you've created.
Now, unfortunately, not every victim makes it out of a situation. And so in those cases, we've also built in a tool within the application called a journal designee. So Tiffany, say you're my best friend and I'm being abused. I can assign you as my journal designee. So I go into my account and I put in your information, and you would receive an invitation, and you would be set up with a light account of Victim's Voice that is linked to my account, but at no time do you have access to my account. And then if something happens to me, and there's 3 very specific things that have to happen to me in order for this to be enacted, I either have to be deceased, I have to be medically incapacitated, or I have to be officially legally declared missing. If one of those 3 happens, you being my best friend, obviously a trusted individual, you would know. And then you can petition through your account to assign a records recipient. And there's some legal steps that you would have to take and some documentation that you would have to submit. And then you would be allowed to assign a records recipient on my behalf. So even in death, my evidence could be heard.
So, wow, it really sounds like you have all the bases covered in terms of how a woman can report these issues and then have someone else be in charge of it in case, unfortunately, something were to happen to her. That's really, really well done.
Thank you. The priority, we have a couple of priorities in our company, pillars, we call them. And these are some guidelines that we will not cross. And one of those is that the user has full control of their account. While they can't delete any information, other than that, they control who has any kind of access to any of the information. They can, just like the records recipient, they can rescind the journal designee at any time, and only they have access to get in. We've built in a lot of securities in the system as well to ensure that their account can't be compromised. One of those securities is that the username and password oftentimes are known and shared, and the abuser forces the victim to give up that information. but we've built in a safe word so that all the sensitive areas of the application, if the abuser happens to be able to log into the account, all they'll see is, start your documentation here or start journaling here. And they won't see any of the entries because of what we talked about before, but it also protects the user from having that information discoverable. Also, we will never communicate with the user outside of the application, with the exception of when they first initially set up the account. We use the email address as an authentication. So when they first set up their account, they will receive an email with a token to verify the email address. They can delete that, and we tell them to delete that email afterward. And it comes from an email address that has nothing to do with victim's voice. So we've built in all these securities. After that, there is an in-mail system within the application. So if for any reason we need to communicate with them, or they have a technical question for us, they need to reach out to us, they can do so only by using that safe word to get into the in-mail system that communicates with our customer support team. So there's no texting, there's no emails, there's no nothing outside of that. And that means that even if they have to use someone else's device to access the application, nothing is stored locally. So nothing is discoverable, and no one's violating any computer usage policies at work or at school or anywhere else. One of the things that is really special about the safe word is that it is unique to that individual, but it is also the line in the sand. And we put all kinds of bold red text and, alerts and all this information that if you lose your safe word, we cannot help you reclaim your account, because we make the assumption that any communication to anyone could be the abuser that we're communicating with. And so we have to protect the user at all costs. And so we had to draw that line somewhere. And that safe word is it. And it is case sensitive. So they have to remember where the capital letters are and all that kind of information. So we really stress, we train our partner members that when they distribute these licenses, please make sure you tell them it's imperative they don't lose their safe word. We tell any users that onboard, do not lose your safe word, because we assume that anyone that reaches out to us is the abuser. We also make that assumption on all of the external systems that we use. All of the information that is stored, all the entries that are stored, everything is encrypted. We don't even have access to it. Tiffany, you could be a user on our account. I would have no idea, and I'm the CEO of the company. We've encrypted everyone's information, but we do use cloud servers. We have our own independent servers. We don't use shared servers, but we still use cloud-based servers. So our CTO is so diligent about ensuring safety and security that even the code that the application is written in is decentralized and it's encrypted. So even if an employee of the cloud service that has high enough credentials, we are assuming that they could be an abuser trying to gain access to our records. So even our code is encrypted.
So it is a completely safe place for any woman who wants to keep record of such important information that would put them in a dangerous situation. It's all taken care of for them.
It is. And, 20% of the people that are going through abuse will report it. 20% won't get justice, but 20% will report it. That leaves 80% that never report. It isn't always just about reporting. Sometimes it's, part of my healing journey means I want to write a book. And timelines and memories get fuzzy when you're dealing with a trauma brain. Things get rewired in your brain. And having a timeline is very helpful for putting everything down to write a book. Or an example, we moved my mother in 5 years ago, and when we were rearranging the basement, I came across all these papers that had been put together with a big giant, clip. And I'm reading through this, and I was just like, wow, this person is so sad and depressed, and this is horrible. And then I'm reading further on, and all of a sudden, a few things are flushing up, and I realize I had blocked all that out. That was my journal through the years. And I had no idea. I didn't even recognize the person that had written those pages. And it was so empowering. It's like when you look outside in your yard and you see the grass, and yeah, it looks a little long. And then you go and mow the grass and you're like, wow, that grass was really long. I had no idea. And it's the same. You have no idea how far you've come when you're in it until you have kind of the two poles to compare against. And this can be just that, to validate that I'm not crazy like they said I was. I'm not making this stuff up. Wow, look how far I've come. Look at the person I've been able to become. That's really empowering.
It certainly is. Yeah. And that's a wonderful, I hadn't even thought about that in terms of what you're providing for women. That's really, really lovely and powerful. So
Yes.
thank you for that work. My goodness. And I have to ask you, in terms of domestic abuse, what aspect of it do you think is most misunderstood?
I think the power and control, even though it's talked about all the time, unless you're in it or have experienced it, you don't understand how fast and how much it controls every aspect of your life. I've had a few people, even men, who have said, well, why don't they just leave? I hate that question. And then then my question is to them further down, so it's not directly associated in the conversation, but further down in the conversation, I'll say, I'm just curious, what was the worst boss or coworker that you've ever had to work with? Tell me about that situation. What did that look like for you? And they'll tell me. And, oh, I was made to do this, and I had to work long hours, or I could never get a raise, or it was just really uncomfortable situation. They just undermined everything I did. And, they'll go on and on and on. And I'll say, why didn't you just leave the job? Well, I couldn't until I found something else. Oh, so what you're saying is that I shouldn't leave an abusive relationship unless I can find another relationship. Is that what you're saying? And let me add the caveat that I have 2 small children and I haven't been allowed to work. I have no access to money, but I could just go to a shelter, right? With my kids. But then if I say that he's been abusive to my children as well, then that's going to get spun around and I'm going to lose my children. So in order to protect my children and make sure I get to protect my children and stay with my children, I stay in the abusive situation and I take the brunt of it so they don't have to.
Exactly.
And in 6 states in the US, there are failure to protect laws where it is a felony and the abused parent can be put in jail for failure to protect their children if they don't leave an abusive situation. However, they're not given the resources to do so. So it's a catch-22.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that there were 6 states that had those laws. I've heard of them before. I thought it was just some, maybe 1, maybe 2, but
there are 14 states with failure to protect laws, but there are 6 states where it's a felony and you will do jail time up to 99 years.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yes. And this is a lot of the training that I do when I talk to government agencies and nonprofits, that you need to be very careful about the information that you document. You need to understand the laws. You need to make sure that you're having conversations with a legal advocate, because the information that you're documenting may be used against the victim.
Right.
And if you
Exactly.
don't understand those laws, you can be putting them in harm's way. One of the
Oh,
examples of that, sorry,
no, it's okay.
one of the examples of that is we were going to add a question to our application asking the person if they were pregnant, because the potential of bringing additional charges if something should happen to that pregnancy. But after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, we decided not to add that question because it could be detrimental to the well-being of the user if they said yes at one point and then they go to court and they're no longer pregnant and there's no child. So even the questions that we ask, we have to be very careful. It's not just written law, it's case law, it's common law that we have to consider.
Right, right. It's beautiful that you're looking out for women in all of those different ways. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking about people asking that question, I've heard that question many times before, and it just, it just drives me crazy too. Why don't you leave, or why doesn't she just leave? And one of the things that I've noticed that we're finally recognizing more and more is emotional and mental abuse as well, which is much more insidious and much more difficult to pinpoint and recognize than physical abuse. But it's also very, very detrimental to a woman's well-being and her children's well-being. And in those situations with a mental or an emotional abuser, women don't even always recognize what's really going on until it's really gone very far.
Yes.
And so it is very hard to kind of remove yourself from that situation, and to have that kind of manipulation happening to you is very tricky.
Yes, it absolutely is. And it's even more tricky to navigate getting out of the relationship, because
Mhm.
that's the most dangerous time. And that's when you really need to have your support system in place, to make sure that you're communicating with your support team. And that support team could be your friends, your family, or professionals. But knowing, being able to communicate to them what's happening to you. And there's so much shame attached to this that it's really difficult. We become the consummate actors of not showing what's going on in a relationship, because we don't want to seem like we're overreacting. And then by the time we realize that we're not overreacting, that we've allowed it to get to this stage. And there's that word, allowed it to get to that stage. But make no mistake, these are predators. These are professional predators. They may not get paid for it, but they are professional predators. They are like prey in the, predators in the wild. They look for people with strong, outgoing personalities. Or even if you're an introvert, you still have that aura about you. And it becomes a challenge to them to wear it down. And they will push it to the limit. And when you push back, they'll back off maybe a half step back, and then they'll push in even further. And every time they push a little further, they chip away at your self-esteem, your morale, your sense of self, everything. And then you push back again and they back off, and call it what you will, the love bombing, the dance of the prey is what I call it. The dance of the predator prey. And it's this push and pull and push and pull back and forth, but they keep pushing to the outer limits until you finally fall over the edge.
Mhm.
And you've fallen in, and you may fall to a level where you can help yourself, or you may not. And so when you're in a situation where the person that you are dealing with, and I would just like to say as a caveat here, we talk a lot about women, but there is a huge percentage of men, an even larger percentage of LGBTQ, and an even larger percentage of Native Americans
Mm-hmm.
who are victims of abuse. And it goes both sides of the fence. There were lots of women in my family who were abusive,
Okay.
more so than the men.
Right.
So I just want to start there. But regardless of who, we'll call them abuser and victim, when the victim, and I say that with intention because you are being victimized by the abuser, by the perpetrator. So when this behavior is coming at you, if the behavior coming at you, you've done nothing to deserve, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with their insecurities, their need for power and control. If they are not supportive in your independence and your personal growth, then that is not a healthy relationship. If you are feeling like you're having to walk around on eggshells all the time, dancing around the personality, that is not excusable behavior. That's on them. Wrap that up in a box, put a bow on it, and give it back to them. It's not yours. It's not your behavior. So don't own it. Give it back. If you are going out with your friends and you're being questioned as to constantly, who are you going to be with? Why are you going to be with them? How long are you going to be out? And it's beyond a healthy, making sure you're safe. When I go out, my husband says, oh, you're going out with your friend Ramona. And yeah, I'll be home around 10 o'clock. We're going to go head over to Market Fair and get some drinks. Great. I'll see you then. If I don't ping you by 10 o'clock, then, ping me back and make sure I'm okay. And if I'm later and I text him, hey, I'm hanging later, it should be, okay, have fun. It shouldn't be, you need to be home now.
Right.
It shouldn't be while I'm out every 5 minutes texting me, where are you? What are you doing? All these text messages and phone calls, and why aren't you calling me back? If my husband calls me 3 times in a row, I'll call him back. I know it's an emergency. He'll text me 911 and let me know it's an emergency. And it damn well better be an emergency. Don't tell me that we're out of frozen peas and you need me to pick them up on the way home. That's not an emergency. But just to constantly keep tabs on me, if they're tracking my entire whereabouts, that's not healthy.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
if I cannot be an independent individual working towards my own growth, then that's not a healthy relationship. And vice versa. If I can't support my partner in his independence and his growth, that's not a healthy relationship.
Well, thank you so much for pointing that out, because that's something that I often talk about on the podcast. And it's something that I think is very important for women to recognize that we don't always recognize. And, of course, we can't always prevent ourselves from getting into a situation with an abuser. However, there are certain things that we can look at, recognize, and do something about before it goes too far. And some of the things that you have just mentioned are things that we can look for in any relationship.
I often say that if you are making excuses for the same behavior 3 or more times in a row, then it's not you. It's them that has the problem, and there is a problem.
Exactly. And also, I
Yeah.
want to add to what you just said, not just making excuses, but making excuses to yourself.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
that's often where we get into trouble is we tend to say, or, when a woman says, well, he's doing this, but I know he loves me, but he's doing this because, he had a horrible childhood or whatever, you're telling yourself, justifying things to yourself. That's when it's really dangerous, at least in my estimation.
Yes. A terrible childhood does not equate into a terrible person.
Exactly.
I am living proof of that.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Yes. I made a choice to not be an abusive person.
Mhm.
And that's a choice. And it took a lot of work to work through a lot of trauma to get me to the place where I am now. But it is a conscious choice. And if you're making excuses for someone, oh, they drank too much. Oh, they're in a horrible job and their boss has been terrible with them. They're, working really late hours. There are a lot of people that do that. It does not excuse the behavior of abuse. And abuse is a behavior. It's not a personality type.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And as you said, it is a choice. And when a person does make that choice, the next step is to get the healing that they need, to do the work that they need to heal from whatever is causing them to think about being abusive or to be abusive. That's the key, is healing, whether you're a victim of abuse or an abuser yourself.
The kindest thing you can do for an abuser and a victim is, if you are in an abusive situation and it's early enough in the game, you can say to that person, look, I love you dearly. And I love you enough to tell you that you need to get help. And I need to be away from you while you get help so that you can focus on yourself and make sure that you are the only point of focus and I'm not a distraction.
Mm.
And I'm going to go work on me over here and you're going to work on you over there. And if after you work on yourself, we still are compatible, then we will get back together. And if we're not, then we're two better people for it. But either way, we've both healed.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
that's a hard conversation to have. But that old adage of, if you love someone, set them free. If it was meant to be, it will come back to you. This is what they're talking about.
Mhm.
Tell them, I don't want to be a distraction in your healing, and I will be. I'm doing you a favor.
Absolutely. So, what can a woman who does find herself in an abusive relationship? I mean, you've got this beautiful tool, this website that you've created that sounds like it is airtight. You have thought of everything, which is wonderful. But what would you suggest as first steps if I'm in an abusive relationship? I want to get out. I don't know what to do. What what should be, or what could be a helpful first step?
We have a tagline that says, legally admissible documentation really doesn't matter until it does. So the first thing is document. Document absolutely everything. Even if you feel like it's insignificant, document it, because in context, it will show the patterns. Then reach out to someone that you trust. Make sure they're not connected with your abuser, because if your abuser can manipulate you, they can manipulate your friends and family as well. So family, unless if it's a good close knit family, then yes, trust your family, but just be careful who you trust. But trust someone and reach out to them, because you're going to need that support and you're going to need them to believe you and support you through this process. The third thing I would say is start finding a safe place to store some documents. The important documents: passport, birth certificate, Those are two pieces of identification that you need to get absolutely everything else. And if the abuser gets their hands on it, it's going to be a real challenge for you to get anything that you need. And you're going to need those documents, and you're going to need that documentation in order to be able to prove that you are who you say you are, that you need the services that you are going to be asking for, and to get the help that you need. Those are the three biggest things. The other thing is start stashing money. The last abusive relationship I had was 21 years ago. Actually, wow, it was 21 years ago, about a week ago. It slipped past me this year. Yay. And I was living with a guy who was very abusive and was trying to peel me away from my money. So he would watch all the money and where it was going. So the first thing I did was, as soon as I got a raise, I kept my paycheck at the steady amount and I put the raise in another bank account. So he never saw the extra money. And cash that I would get, I would put and hang in behind pictures that were hanging on the wall. Because who thinks to look at a picture on a wall, right? It was hanging in plain sight. There was cash all over the house, and he had no idea. Just if the walls have stains, make sure you put the picture back on the wall properly. But, find a safe place, start a PO box, get all your important mail, like that other bank account, anything coming from Social Security, anything like that. Insurance, if you have separate insurance, have it go to your PO box. Just start peeling your life apart, because if by the chance that they do go off and they do get help and you come back together, great. You can make that decision whether you want to put everything together or not. Or if you need that, like I did, I was able to buy a house on my own because I had made those plans. I had made them far enough out in advance that I was able to do that. I would use my lunch breaks to go look for a house, and was able to buy a house. So it's start separating yourself from them. Start separating the really important things, but do not let them know that you're doing it. Because as soon as they get any inkling that they are losing control, make no mistake, they become dangerous, highly dangerous. You can take someone who used to scream and shout and put their fist through a wall, and you let them know that you're leaving and you have the means to do so, and you may never make it back home again.
Right. Yes.
So protect yourself. That's why letting someone know what's going on and putting together a safety plan of how you're going to do it. I packed up all the contents of our cohabitated living space during lunch, and all my friends came over with moving trucks and pickup trucks and cars. And he went to work. And as soon as he went to work, I went back home and started packing stuff up. And everybody came over at lunchtime. And he came home from work and I was gone. And he had no idea where I was. That was a safety plan. I let my coworkers know because they were the safe people. They were the people that I could trust. And they helped me.
Such a phenomenal story. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's very inspiring to hear. Because, as you said, a very small percentage of abuse cases are reported, and not all of those are really followed up on, or, there's not always a happy ending to those stories. So I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
So I do have one question about the website. Is it available to women across the country, or is it just a local, New Jersey, Pennsylvania site? How does that work?
Yeah, we have users in all 50 states. And during the pandemic, when everything was shutting down, we worked really hard to put out our updated version which also helps navigate tribal jurisdiction and legal compliance with Native American tribal courts.
Oh my
So we
God.
worked with a lot of tribal judges and tribal advocates and tribal lawyers to make sure that we got it right for them as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's also because it's browser-based translation, it is translated in over 100 languages.
Wow.
And it's ADA compliant so that screen readers can read the questions, and the colors are, ADA compliant. Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this information, very important information for the listeners of the podcast. And I'm so grateful to you for being here and sharing it. But now I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk more about you and what you're doing in your personal life. Because as I mentioned, we met at an herbal conference, and you have already shared with me some of the lovely, lovely things that you're doing with herbs. So would you please share with our listeners?
Sure. So a far cry from technology, but I do unplug. And my husband and I started a business. It's Sheri Kurdakul LLC. And I am studying with the East West School of Planetary Herbology. They have a focus in traditional Chinese medicine, but also with Ayurvedic and Western herbalism as well. So I am in my training to become a certified clinical herbalist.
Hooray!
So I do already have several people that I work with, and I have been growing herbs for, as long as I can remember. I live very close. I call it urban gardening. So I live very close to a city and have a little 1/4 acre lot, but we have the whole front yard is medicinal herbs, and some of the backyard is also like culinary and some medicinal herbs. And then we also have a vegetable garden in the back and fruit trees. So we have quite a bit on this little oasis of our property. And really, my focus has been looking at herbs that have helped me through my own healing. You don't escape 29 years of abuse without residual effects from that. And because mine started so young, being a toddler, it was really ingrained in how my brain was wired. So anxiety, people see me as very happy and cheery and, like you said, very shiny and all of that. But I do have moments of sadness, and I struggled greatly with complex PTSD for years and severe depression and all of those things. And I still suffer from anxiety and panic attacks, but I've learned how to manage some of those through behavioral changes and dietary changes. And I've also learned what our plant neighbors provide to be able to support me in my own healing. So I'm really focused on herbs that are healing for those types of spaces. For instance, this spring, we have linden trees everywhere in my neighborhood. And linden is a fantastic herb for kind of quelling that nighttime anxiety and panic attacks. And when you add it with chamomile, it's very soothing and helps kind of just slow everything down and helps you sleep at night. So having a linden chamomile tea at night just completely relaxes me. I can't drink it too late or I don't get up in the morning, but but it's that kind of, simple, gentle herbal support that supports me in ensuring that I can have a healthy end to my day and a healthy start to my next day.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, herbs are so magical and special, and it's so wonderful to work with them. And they are such a beautiful accompaniment to a healing journey.
Yes. And so I started a blog series called Meet Your Neighbor, because we're not the only sentient beings on this planet. And we do live next to them and with them every day. So I think to myself, we oftentimes live in neighborhoods or apartment buildings and we don't know who our neighbors are. But we should know our neighbors, because then we start to care about our neighbors and we start to build community. And we can build community with the animals that live around us and the plants that reside with us and around us. And they are our neighbors. So yes, that's my blog series is Meet Your Neighbor.
Oh, beautiful. And for listeners, I will definitely in the show notes post a link to Sheri's website as well as Victim's Voice app. I will put those links in the show notes so that you can access them easily.
Thank you.
Of course. So is there anything else that you would like to share with us today?
I think there are so many beautiful spirits out there that have been broken and forgotten how to be beautiful again. But one of the posts that we put up on social media is, and I think you should envision this every time you think of yourself as broken, as glow sticks are brightest when they're broken in the dark. So go be a glow stick and shine your brightest until the light comes back again.
Thank you so much, Sheri. What an inspiring note to end this conversation on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. As I keep saying, I'm so grateful to have you sit down with me today and share all of this wonderful information for the listeners of this podcast. And please keep me posted on any new activities or any projects that you're working on. I would love to share more with the listeners of this podcast about what you're doing.
I will. Thank you. And with gratitude and glitter, thank you so much for allowing me on your podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this show. I hope you found something useful. Like everything in life, we can take what we need and leave the rest. Please feel free to contact me with comments or questions at womanonherpath@gmail.com.